I think people focus so much on the new that they forget to make sure they're reinventing the thing that they're best at.
Welcome to Honest E-Commerce, a podcast dedicated to cutting through the BS and finding actionable advice for online store owners. I'm your host, Chase Clymer, and I believe running a direct-to-consumer brand does not have to be complicated or a guessing game. On this podcast, we interview founders and experts who are putting in the work and creating real results. I also share my own insights from running our top Shopify consultancy, Electric Eye. We cut the fluff in favor of facts to help you grow your e-commerce business. Let's get on with the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Honest E-Commerce. Today, I'm welcoming to the show the co-founder and former CEO of Chubbies, the co-founder at Loop Returns, and now co-founder and CEO of GoodDay Software, Kyle Hency.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Chase. Glad to be here.
I'm excited to chat. Yeah, I've talked to a few of your co-workers, is a way I'll say it, in the past. I've had quite a few ex-Chubbies and ex-Loop people. Shout out to Columbus, Ohio, Loop's headquarters. But let's just dive in real quick. Where did you start your career in e-commerce? How'd you get started down this path?
Yeah, I think obviously starting Chubbies was really like the start of my entrepreneurial career, but quite a ways, probably 5 years even prior to that, I was really fortunate as a young analyst in investment banking to work on the Amazon and Zappos deal. And so as a young, 22-year-old, I had a front row seat to a lot of hard work that was done to make that deal happen, but also just saw what was happening at Zappos. And it was just such a special business. You could see kind of the future of like how people were going to be shopping on the internet. And for me personally, I was completely hooked at that moment. So then everything after that, I was really focused on internet and e-commerce, whether it was investing in the software tools in the ecosystem or talking to and researching all of these e-commerce companies that were growing up on the early internet of the time. And remember, this is like 5 years before there was even an advertising platform on Facebook. So it was just like a different generation of e-commerce company. So yeah, but then like operationally spent my early years as an entrepreneur at Chubbies growing up and learning a lot.
All right. Well, give me the elevator pitch of your career at Chubbies, because while we love Chubbies, we've told the story before,
Yeah.
But I do want to talk about what you're up to now, and we've got a few pieces to get through.
Yeah, of course. So like, look, at Chubbies, I started it along with three of my best friends, like some of the most talented people I've ever met. And when you're a young startup and you're in your mid-20s, it's really exciting to start something like that with other talented, hard-charging folks. And I think it was like such a huge pickup for us as, a startup e-commerce business to have four of us running around being pretty wild, figuring out kind of the edges of what we could make happen with the brand. And so I would just say that process was so rewarding and so fun. It's almost like hard to imagine bottling that back up again because it was just like kind of such a moment for me. But in terms of like things we learned over time and things I reflect on that are important, I think over time we learned to be really methodical with our team and treat our internal team at Chubbies with a lot of care and thoughtfulness. And, when we got, call it 7 to 8 years into the business and look back, we had like a huge audience of people who had spent over 5 years at the business. And even when I left, in 2021, I think there were still a lot of the early folks in the brand. And as I reflect, I think that's probably the thing I'm most proud of, that we built something that was special enough that a huge audience of our employees, committed their careers, a decade of their careers to making it happen. And so, yeah, that's the thing I like look back on and reflect most positively about.
I think that's what the folks refer to as building a great company culture.
Yeah, totally. And like, look, we were notably bad at that at the beginning. And it was completely non-existent in the early days. And so I think like most good company cultures, like ours was very authentic when we decided to put our minds to putting it down to paper. We ran a big process with all of our employees, and we were able to build a document that we actually lived for the next 5 years. It was very powerful for us.
Absolutely. Is there any other kind of learnings or heck, maybe even mistakes that you learned from your time at Chubbies that you still look back on, or you think that might resonate with our audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of these things are so simple, but just not forgetting why customers are there to engage with you and your brand. It's so easy to be building these things and be like, you know what, we're not doing this, we're not doing that, so let's go do all these new things. And the simple thing we learned over time was that if you just got really, really great at the thing that people were already coming to you for, it was one of the most high leverage things you could be doing. For us, we were making men's shorts, and we were banging a lot of pots and pans about a brand that was evolving, a radical shorts brand that was growing up on the internet, right? And that stuff still holds true to today. I mean, the percentage of total that is men's bottoms of Chubbies today is wild to me. Not at all how I thought it would come together, but the underpinning of the why there is just, that's what we're best at. That's where we spend all of our time and energy. And look, I think the team that's still building Chubbies today is doing a great job of expanding into things that we never would have dreamed of. But the core nucleus of the business is still kind of centered in the thing that we started in. And I think people focus so much on the new that they forget to make sure they're reinventing the thing that they're best at.
Yeah, I think that entrepreneurs of all shapes and sizes and wherever they are in their kind of journey, I think part of being an entrepreneur is having that terrible shiny object syndrome and always wanting to try new things or try it again a different way. And as I mature as an entrepreneur and as a consultant in this industry, I find myself giving similar advice all the time, which is you haven't even maxed out this channel or this, angle or this campaign. You don't need to spread yourself thin trying every different marketing channel or adding every different marketplace when you still haven't just maximized your ROI in this one area where you're already performing.
I completely agree. I mean, the other thread that I pull on from this is which is one of Bezos's things, which is to focus on the things that are not going to change over time and figure out how what you're doing is going to benefit from them. And one of those areas, as I reflect, that's kind of funny is when we got into building this brand, 80 or 90% of all retail was transacting offline. And we were very excited about innovating and being disruptive in an e-commerce environment that was being created. But it's here we are over a decade later, and still 80% of retail happens in a physical store format. And lo and behold, a huge piece of Chubbies business is offline through wholesale partners who are amazing all over the country. And that's how human beings like to buy things. And I just think it's really interesting as I reflect back around just a young entrepreneur being how are we so different than everything around us? But then you get to 10, 15, 20 years and ultimately you have to be great at all of these things.
I think another thing about how people buy, especially apparel, is they need to make sure it fits and enter Loop Returns. I know this story like the back of my hand because I know some of your co-founders personally, but give us, how did that happen? Explain to the audience.
Yeah. So the original kernel for Loop was very much an operational problem that Chubbies was actually experiencing. And so we were working with our developer partners at the time at Rocket Code, who were based in Columbus, John Poma and team. And we basically were man, our customer service representatives are just responding to the same email. I want a refund. I want an exchange. And they're responding the same thing over and over and over again. And so the simple solution at the time was a project with Rocket Code to say, hey, what if we just make this experience something where they can put their order number and their email in, and we just say, cool, let's do an exchange and let's plop them right back on our site and have them select what they're doing. So we can just get rid of this whole back and forth email interaction, and we can just let them go shopping. And so that was the simple insight in the early days. We put this in place And we were like, holy cow, we can just take our 3 customer experience reps who we love, and we can get them working on other operational things that are way harder in the business. And so once we had that experience, we had 2 thoughts. Well, 1, other brands are going to want this. And 2, if other brands do want this, I think this is like its own company. And, that was a real moment. As I think about my own life as an entrepreneur, taking that back to our board at Chubbies, they're like, what are you talking about? You have a really successful brand that's doing well. Why are we wasting a minute of our time around this? And, the entire management team, myself included, had a lot of conviction around what Loop has become. And we actually pushed back. And in the 10 years of managing our board, it was actually the only time we really had we're not that interested in this, but okay moment. And thankfully, we continued to build Loop. We put an operating team in place. A lot of folks worked really hard to make Loop what it is today. And now, look, it's the market leader in its space. They have upwards of now 5,000 Shopify brands on Loop, and it's one of the like real innovators in the Shopify ecosystem. So, for me, I'm super proud about what we've built there. And look, I've unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know how to think about it, never been operational over there. So just benefiting from all the hard work of the team over at Loop. And of course, we're trying to introduce new customers from time to time. It makes sense.
Absolutely. I think that that's like the entrepreneurial dream of like selling your sawdust. You build something to solve your problem and then realize there's a whole other business here. How long into that process did that idea start to kind of catch?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty wild. So we introduced this. We were fortunate enough that some early brands, Allbirds and Cotopaxi, who were brand friends of ours at the time, both agreed to kind of get in there as design partners with us at Chubbies to like help make Loop real. But the first couple of years, we were showing brands and end consumers that this self-service interaction was superior. And like anything that's good, it's like there's a little bit of friction when you're teaching consumers to behave in a new way. So it did take a couple of years to get it right and make it feel good. But then you fast forwarded another, probably 3 or 4 years into the journey, and there were a lot of people building a lot of different interfaces for this self-service returns experience, and it was pretty powerful. And there's a lot of momentum in the business, and yeah. So I think back at those times, and what was really cool is that this entire market kind of was created out of nothing, but Loop kind of stayed on the forefront of it the whole time. And then if you rewind a year from now, the market actually consolidated in some unique ways. Loop ended up buying Returnly, which was a big competitor of ours in the early days. So just like a full circle moment for the team over there.
Absolutely. Now let's pivot to what you're up to these days. Obviously, we have spoken of your accolades. You know what you're talking about here. And, let's get into ERPs, right? First and foremost, I would say half our audience doesn't know what they are. So in layman's terms, what is an ERP and why doesn't Shopify do it for me?
All right, we're starting at ground zero. Well, one, I will say the acronym ERP means nothing to nobody. So I'm not even going to try to explain that. What we're building is an alternative to ERPs and completely rethinking the entire exercise of investing in an ERP like what we did back in our day at Chubbies. And so if you want to just talk through the surface areas of what an ERP is, this is something that helps manage your inventory, helps manage your orders as they flow through your system. They push them down into your fulfillment and logistics operations, and then ultimately through to your financials. So taking all of those exercises out of spreadsheets, it's typically sitting in a set of disparate systems and or spreadsheets, and putting it into one unified system is what people think of as investing in an ERP. When you're actually building the brand, the way it feels is you're kind of updating all of these things everywhere. You're pulling down CSV imports from here and there and there. You're mashing them into like monster Excel spreadsheets, running a bunch of VLOOKUPs to answer a bunch of complex questions. In general, that feels very reactive when you're in the moment and you're trying to make all of these decisions, sort of shooting from the hip, but sort of informed by this monster Excel spreadsheet you created, to like move all of this into one system. You only do the data entry one time versus in all these systems. All the systems will talk to one another. And, bonus points in the case of GoodDay, we're going to start to be contextually aware and actually say, if this is true over in this part of your business and this is true in this part of your business, here's this useful information for you. And so, I really do think of it as this like kind of centralizing experience that really becomes the backbone of your operational business. And then as it relates to Shopify, right, we're both building as closely as we can to Shopify, but also studying the edge of Shopify. It's one of the most powerful platforms for commerce out there, super innovative. But they also like draw their line on where they're going to stop building.
I remember hearing it the other day. They want to do most things for most merchants. And that is a very specific term. Everything else are living up to the partner ecosystem.
And I would say where they stop is where we start. and like, look, I think they've been incredible partners to us in that when they're working with a merchant and it's clear that the merchant has needs that are beyond the most of the most, right? They're introducing them to us. And it's an amazing relationship. And we're building our entire business on top of their platform. As a result. So really, really powerful space to be focused on. Some really specific ones, building out B2B and wholesale flows at an earlier age in the brands are things that we do today out of the box. We make that really, really simple for brands, and that's either doing just-in-time B2B business or pre-booking in advance. We focus a lot of our attention on connecting inventory flows to accurate FIFO level COGS. So under the hood of all of the complex operational stuff we do is a bunch of accounting, the really exciting stuff that GoodDay is doing. And that's just not stuff that Shopify wants to spend a lot of time on, right? And so that's probably one of the most interesting ways that we're complementary and just building in a different direction and can kind of extend what they're doing. Just for the mental model for folks, like at Chubbies, we had Shopify in place, and then we would send half of our team over into another system called NetSuite. And those two combined was like our core infrastructure. So what we're doing is just saying, take the power of a lot of those tools from NetSuite, make them really simple, and move them closer to Shopify where the operators are already operating.
Can you talk to me about any historical experience you have integrating NetSuite, what that looks like from a time commitment, a budget commitment, a resource commitment to implement NetSuite on a modern direct-to-consumer brand?
Oh, man. My perspective is a bit dated, so I will acknowledge that. Talking to the Chubbies experience, this was 5 years ago, 6 years ago, really, when we were doing a lot of our work. And we spent 12 to 18 months initially building custom scripting to handle all the complex inventory management requirements for Chubbies at the time. And so we had really like 12 to 18 month period before we got any value from that system. Over the life of all the building we did on NetSuite, we spent about $1 million. So you're talking about a system that took $1 million before it started giving a lot back. Now, we also benefited from the other side of that. We built out a really successful implementation ultimately, and we felt the power of it, particularly during COVID, where the supply chain just required a lot of fast action and a lot of fast decisions. We were really, really strong in that sort of moment of uncertainty. So the vision for GoodDay is like, take these like hard parts of traditional ERPs and make them real simple. So our systems we can put in place in 4 weeks. Our systems don't come with huge upfront implementation fees or big groups of outsourced developers you need to put them in place. We just hop in there with you and put your data in the system and configure the system for you. So your time to value in our system is both like completely dislocated from an overall cost perspective, but also really tight. From the moment you start working to implement GoodDay to the time you get value is typically 4 to 8 weeks. So it's just like a completely different experience around this set of tools. And that is the disruption we're trying to bring with GoodDay.
Absolutely. And I asked that pointed question for a reason. And I just like want to point out on our end, we've been in this space since 2016. And as a specific decision of service offerings that we wanted to handle over at our agency, ERPs suck to integrate, and we just say no anytime NetSuite comes up, right? Because it's a different monster. It's like Salesforce has its own ecosystem, NetSuite has its own ecosystem, Shopify has its own ecosystem, and it's just a whole different thing. And sometimes you have to understand your limitations as a consultant, and you're just like, you're honestly speaking a different language, and you need to go find someone that understands that language. And so that's just the amount of lift that's required to implement something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think a part of the impetus for the why now is the state of building brands in Shopify. It has become harder, right? Like, we're in a completely different interest rate environment. The consumers are behaving completely differently. And we need technology partners that are working with the brands that are really helping them create successful, resilient brands. As like step one, and then figure out the economics as you're building. But we really do think there's an opportunity to just make these tools a lot more simple, maintain the power of these inventory and order management tools, but just really drastically simplify them. And look, we're not for everybody as a result. We can't customize to no end, or we just become NetSuite. And so I do think structurally, if you're like, well, really, how is it different? I mean, we're really opinionated around retail. We're operators, and we're going to set your team down some flows that are tried and true flows that make a lot of sense to us, but maybe they wouldn't work for your business for some reason. Maybe you do need a fully custom head to toe build out on NetSuite. But our belief here, at least in the Shopify ecosystem, is the vast majority of these brands will make a lot of sense for.
Yeah, no, I think that making some of those decisions for brands, and I think that was one of the most powerful things about Shopify. I said, you're using this checkout for the longest time. Like, yep. They wouldn't let you noodle where you didn't need to noodle, and it's like, focus on the things that make you money. And I think that when you're looking at a blank page and you don't know where to start, that is terrifying, especially when you're talking about custom software and powerful software like NetSuite. So I think helping people make some of those choices at the beginning, get the ball rolling, going from 0 to 1 is insanely valuable.
Yeah, and I think it's worth sharing that where we actually, it's easy to take a lot of what we're talking about and say, man, these guys must just be going right at NetSuite and taking their customers. Wrong.
Yeah, we keep saying that. Yeah, no, they're different customers.
Yeah, actually wrong. They're completely different customers. We're actually working with young brands that are mostly in Shopify and spreadsheets and saying, hey, let's get some of this data into a centralized tool so the rest of your team can see it. So people throughout your organization can self-serve. Where did we learn that? That is pulled directly from Loop, right? Like, let's let all of your employees inside the business have access to your operating data and let them self-serve. Like, that's real leverage inside of your company, especially when you're 5 or 10 employees. And so traditional ERPs, they literally require more full-time employees to manage them and keep them alive. Our systems do the opposite. As you scale, you're going to not require as many new employees. And that's the way that we intend to just actually foundationally build more resilient brands with our partners. And there's a big part of what we're doing, which is like, you kind of have to adopt the GoodDay method of operating, which is a bit more lean, more centralized systems, helping people wherever you can, self-service. These are not necessarily how everybody wants to operate. So there is a bit of change management as you go through this transformation.
Absolutely. And you alluded to a few moments ago, helping younger brands, and it's a term that doesn't mean much out of context. So let's use size as far as like sales per year. Like, when does it make sense for a brand to start exploring a solution such as GoodDay versus a solution that might be a little more custom? Well,
I would say in the case of GoodDay, we typically are talking to brands anywhere from 1 to several hundred million on Shopify. That's a wide range, but it's wide because revenue levels don't really communicate operating complexity. Really, any brands that have multiple pools of physical inventory that they're shipping from. Think of that as multiple distribution centers or a bunch of retail stores, or brands who have a need for virtual inventory segmentation. So managing a pool of inventory that's e-commerce, a pool of inventory that's retail stores, and a pool of inventory that's wholesale and B2B. Like you might be a 1 million revenue brand and have all of those needs. You're going to make a lot of sense, and GoodDay is going to look amazing to you. And I do think a big part of the mission here is to democratize these tools, make them easier to put in place, make them more cost effective. But really the goal with what we're doing is get in there with these brands early as they're growing, where we can be really impactful, help them learn this way of working through the system so that in 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, they don't need to graduate to some larger, more custom ERP. They should be able to get 90+% of the way there in our own systems.
Absolutely. Now, we've talked quite a bit about ERPs, and is there anything that if someone was thinking about a traditional ERP that GoodDay maybe doesn't do?
Yeah. So in general, we have decided, like Shopify, to partner in the areas where we think there are really great innovations happening outside of our sphere of influence. What we're really great at is making a lot of complex operations for brands simple, right? I'll talk specifically to the WMS landscape. In the WMS landscape, you have real innovators. You have ShipHero over there. You have a bunch of other WMS innovators, and we partner with most of them. So for the brand, what that means is they can work with the 3PL and the WMS that they want to. So they have a bit of like freedom in who they want to work with there. Some ERPs actually build that entire WMS system out. To me, in the Shopify ecosystem, that makes no sense. The other area is EDI. So EDI is its own beast, almost as complex as ERP itself. In the EDI landscape, you have SPS Commerce, which is just like NetSuite, a total bruiser, but also the market leader. And we're partnered really closely with a disruptor over there called Crystal EDI. And they're the no-code, just built in the last 3 or 4 years version of EDI. It's a far more simple, higher touch and service. It's all the things we're hoping to be ourselves in ERP. And so I do think there's like a new generation of operating software that's coming through right now that's going to be very competitive and built very closely to Shopify.
That's amazing, Kyle. Now, is there anything I didn't ask you about that you think would resonate with our audience?
I mean, yeah, I and this is more on the brand side. I think growth is easy to be the mantra. And one of the most rewarding things we ever did in the Chubbies experience was we started to focus on resilience as a prerogative. And that allowed us to focus on healthy growth. That allowed us to focus on profit, incremental profit generation. And I think there's this idea that that's like somehow not as compelling in the day-to-day. And that is just completely contrarian to our experience with Chubbies. When we started to get into this resilience-oriented mindset, it actually opened up our creativity. When you're in a revenue growth at all cost mindset, it's really, really limiting operationally. And so one of the things that we did is we just focused the business back in 2016, 2017 on being far, far more resilient. And when we went through hard times in 2020, we were kind of ready. We were ready to step up and create a lot of separation from our peers. And so I just always try to help entrepreneurs be thinking about those long-term, big things that they're focused on. And I say that knowing that absolutely there are moments in time where revenue growth and market share is all that matters. We might be entering the next phase of that. To me, I kind of feel like we've hit the kind of like bottom or base of where we're going to be, and I see the next thing around the corner as much more growth oriented for a lot of these brands. But man, I hope we don't lose track of how important it has been to build some resilience.
Absolutely, and when you say resilience, I hear be profitable and cut and monitor your costs and be very insightful about your decisions to spend.
Yeah, and long-term minded. right? There's a lot of things you might want to do in the short term that would hurt you in the long term. And so I just really urge folks to be thinking about the long-term prize.
Absolutely. Now, if I'm listening to this and I have been thinking about ERPs as a long-term thing that I want to do, how do I get a hold of you? What should I do?
Yeah, go to gooddaysoftware.com, sign up for a product demo. I'll hop in. It'll be me showing you around the product. We're a lean team over here, almost all engineers, and we're building a lot of product. So if I gave you a product demo today and I gave you another one in 90 days, you'd see a completely different product. So I would just urge anybody who's interested in looking at these sort of tools to hop on and sign up, and we'll be excited to meet you.
Awesome, Kyle. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
All right. Thanks, Chase.
We can't thank our guests enough for coming on the show and sharing their knowledge and journey with us. We've got a lot to think about and potentially add into our own businesses. You can find all the links in the show notes. You can subscribe to the newsletter at honestecommerce.co to get each episode delivered right into your inbox. If you're enjoying this content, consider leaving a review on iTunes. That really helps us out. Lastly, if you're a store owner looking for an amazing partner to help you get your Shopify store to the next level, reach out to Electric Eye at electriceye.io/connect. Until next time.